Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. It is Sunday, January 26th, 2025. It has been 256 days since we have started reading, with 590 pages complete of 628, meaning we have 38 pages left to go, and a 93.95% and 3 whole books of the way through Finnegans Wake. Welcome to episode 37 of Wake, the podcast that is fair dinkum, true blue and dinky dye. As we enter the final mile, as we go about fulfilling a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegans Wake out loud just once. I'm your host, Toby Malone, joined once more by the man who's always believed in me and this project every step of the way, TJ Young. Hi, TJ.
How's it going, Toby?
It's great. It's great. I really believe that you have believed in this project and me the whole way through. We were talking before we started recording that I'm always surprised when you're always like, yep, let's do another episode, because I'm just waiting for you to go, oh, dude, we're still doing this?
No. I mean, if there's one thing that you know about me is that when I decide to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it all the way through. But I think the other aspect of it is I've drug you along on enough creative rabbit holes and random tangents that even if I didn't believe in this project, which I 100% do, I'd be like, but I still owe Toby one. So I'm just
you don't owe me anything. But I think I always find it interesting the way that the universe works in every time a door closes, a window opens. And so I feel as though as this one starts to wind down, you have been hit, the muse has been having fun with you and hitting you with idea after idea. You keep texting me and like, what about this idea? And what about this idea? So I feel as though
I didn't even think about that. And 2 episodes ago, I was like, Toby, I have this idea. And I was like, and I already have all these people involved. So, and you're like, cool. And I was like, great. Yeah,
exactly. And then, before we came on, you were talking about a trilogy of plays that you're thinking of writing. I'm like, cool, man. That's going to take us to 2030 right there.
So, I mean, if I'm allowed to write them in the summer, I think I could knock one out of summer.
Absolutely.
And then we'd be good.
Let's make it happen. It's going to happen. The other thing I mentioned as I was starting in the introduction, I used a few cringe-worthy Australian phrases because, of course, today is Australia Day. So I'd like to wish everyone out there a happy Invasion Day. January 20th. Yeah, that's what we call it. I mean, that's what woke call it, and I'm very happy to be woke to my father's chagrin. But yes, today is the day in 1788, in January 26th, when the first fleet arrived in Australia, and everything got worse for the Indigenous inhabitants. We generally call it Invasion Day. And there's a push to change the date because in America you celebrate Independence Day because it's the day you won a war, which is great. Australia, we celebrate Australia Day because that's the day we invaded. Not great. So I'm sorry to any loyal nationalists out there who believe very strongly in the Union Jack, but I feel as though the next generation is going to be the one that makes today just another day in history.
It's funny because I've started to kind of feel the same way about 4th of July. Because 4th of July, I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, it's Independence Day, but independence for some. So I am a bigger proponent of Juneteenth because I'm like, and then, I call it my 4th of July. And a lot of times people are like, what are you doing for 4th of July? And I'm like, if it's up to me, I'm going to work so I could possibly shift that day off. But,
Yeah, this is funny when there's that mandated celebration, and generally when the celebration is of something that's not exactly glorious. But it's one of those days where Meg asked me, what do we want to do for Australia Day? Do you want to have a special dinner or bake a special cake or do something, get some beer or something? And I was like, no, I'm good. I've been gone so long that it's more of just just another day. Sadly, I'm still very proud to be Australian, but I have more fun on Canada Day because it's the first of July, so it's warm,
it's summer,
holidays, and that's always a fun time. So we are here at the end of book 3. I don't know, I can't believe it. We've finished book 3. We're nearly 600 pages in.
Insane.
I very, very, very vividly remember our first ever reading episode, and we got, I think, 16 pages in before we were going to read the first 25 or 30 pages, and we were so underprepared. I remember this very clearly. That I turned a page and we came across the Mutton Jute dialogue, and I immediately got to the beginning of that and tapped out and was like, whoop. I'm going to stop there. That's going to be the end of the episode. And I thought maybe that could even be the end if that didn't work out. But here we are, 600 pages later.
You know, it's crazy because this is the second 600 some odd page book that we've tackled together.
Oh, yes. You've got it right by your side there as well.
I do. Our shared copy of the Three Musketeers that we both have the same cover of.
Yeah.
And I often think about that. Even when we started the Three Musketeers, I remember us being like, are we gonna do this?
Well, and it was more that, when you got the commission to write Three Musketeers, the adaptation, which wasn't yet called The Inseparables, we both went, okay, we can do that. And then we thought, wait, what do we know about the Three Musketeers aside from the Disney movie with Kiefer Sutherland? And then we thought, well, maybe we're going to have to read this book because the book is not the same. Because you suddenly realize this is a big, long book. What's in there? And then we read it and realized that there's very little in there that resembles any of those film adaptations because of the way it was written in a serial form, bit by bit. I mean, very much like The Wake was, where he was writing it and releasing it. But unlike Dumas or Dickens or any of those guys who were writing in that way, Joyce didn't seem to care about public opinion in terms of affecting how he wrote the rest of it.
No. And I will say that we're at this weird space where, because of the format of the podcast, like you said, with 38 pages left, if it was up to just you and I and we were just like doing it by ourselves, we would have read that by now.
Yeah.
But so it kind of feels like the ball rolling down the hill and we're like stopping it right before it hits level ground. But it is crazy that we've gotten this far.
It is. Yeah. I feel every now and then someone will say, how far in are you? And I say, we're at 590 out of 628. So it should only take us another month to finish. And they look at a month to read 38 pages. I go, well, we got bonus episodes to record in there. And we got a summary episode and we got all this other stuff. We're trying to enjoy it while it's here. We're
right.
It feels like the final weeks of senior year is that you go, I'm going to try and make the most of this while we're here because when it's gone, it's gone.
Are there any other books that you have like tried to savor in the same way?
I discovered there's an Australian author named Trent Dalton who would be very familiar to my Australian listeners, maybe not as much in the rest of the world, but he is an incredible, was a journalist who started writing novels, and he's written 3 quite spectacular novels. They're very Australian and kind of really inspirational, and they're the kinds of ones where I try to slow down while I'm reading them because I know he only has 3, and I'm reading his 3rd one right now. He has one called Boy Swallows Universe, which is beautiful book about childhood in Queensland, and that is a book that was adapted into a Netflix series, which I think is probably available on. We watched it on Canadian Netflix, so it should be on all Netflixes. You might have to dig for it, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so when I read him, because I know he only has a couple of books out there, that is where I try to really sort of slow down and not race through. So yeah, how about yourself?
Yeah, I've kind of run into that with a couple fantasy novel series that I've been working on, which like to varying degrees of success. One is called Black Sun. That book is absolutely gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And when it said trilogy on the first, on the first book, and I was like, okay, let me look. I was like, the second one's not even out yet. I was like, I gotta.
Yeah. Right? That's always a problem. Yeah. Like I remember reading, you were probably in the same situation. And obviously back in the day, we didn't have the same issue about the author as we have now, but we were reading Harry Potter in real time, right?
Had to milk it.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm waiting 3 years between 2.5 years. No, yeah. Right?
Or I think about yours and my experience of waiting for new seasons of Barry to come out.
Oh gosh, it was like torture.
Yeah, torture.
When the pandemic hit, I remember we were both Googling like how far into production. Oh, they haven't started. Damn it! Right?
Yeah, that pushed back. Yeah.
And then there's another book called No Gods, No Monsters, which I started reading it, and I was like, this feels like it's going to be a very complete story. And as I started to get to the back end, I was like, there's way too much to sum up. It's like you can tell the author is smart enough not to rush the last 40 pages.
Right.
And then I was like, let me go. Oh, there's another one. And so like I've actually stopped that one completely.
Yeah.
And then I bought the second one. So that's my plan. Actually, after we finish Wake is to finish that first novel and go into the second.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter is very much in that same kind of mode where she's always starting the first in the series, and we're always going, oh, come on, can you just finish the previous series that you've got? But she has some where she has like 9-10 books in a series, and I mean, it's great. Especially those YA things where they churn them out. The Rick Riordan, the Percy Jackson series, he just churns them out.
Oh yeah. I felt the same way when I first discovered Hunger Games. I remember I was like, Mockingjay better come out, right? Like I was like, I need
we have the second and third in that series in hardcover because we read the first one in paperback. It had been out for a while, and then we got the two new ones immediately as they came out because we had to read them.
We had to, yeah.
Yeah. So getting this far in is, I'm feeling quite accomplished, and I feel as though book 3 was a very different experience to book 1 and 2. Obviously, book 2, I think we've agreed, has been the most difficult of the books. Book
By
1
far.
sort of got us in, sort of introduced the characters. But book 3, what's your immediate reactions to getting to the end of book 3 here?
Yeah, it's twofold. One is it does feel like we're on the downside of the roller coaster. Like we've reached the crest, so therefore we actually get to enjoy the fall in like a fun way. But the other part is it felt like a sort of mental relief. I think part of it is because we are reading it out loud, and I think I found my rhythm reading it in book 3, which is which it's no longer a weekly humbling, and I feel like I can just enjoy it on a different level. But I think the other part of that is that I am still amazed by Joyce's ability to flex his true knowledge of English writing and like the evolution of novels and the transcription of writing styles. We often talk about how in book 3 there is that camera view section, right? And from the formatting to going from these long, almost 3-page long sentences to these really staccato, short, intentional, almost slug lines. I was like, the stylistic mastery, I think, is really fascinating. So I think that for this, like you said, the first book really felt like I have to get you into unknowing everything you know. I felt like the second book was also manipulating form, but it felt like a recapitulation or the next iteration of book 1. Like, if book 1 is hard, this is how I can show you it can get harder, right? And then book 3 is like, and now that I've shown you I can make things really complicated, let me also show you how simple I can make things,
right. And if we're dividing things up, like if you're thinking about the fact that this is the night book, when we get no real sense about when the sleeper drifts off to sleep. We've had theories in the past from previous readers that this is Bloom's dream, and there's nothing really in here to suggest that Iwika is Bloom from Ulysses. He comes home and he lies down next to Molly head to toe and goes to sleep, and there's nothing really to suggest that this is Bloom's dream. But if he's going to sleep at a certain point in the evening, say at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something like that, and we divide the night up into 8 hours, say, then the first book would be the first couple of hours. He's sort of settling in, but then we get the darkest point of the night after 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning in book 2, which is the sort of the toughest, or maybe we're talking about a few hours longer, but we also get the dreamer stirring here, and the dawn is coming. And this last section of book 3 is called Dawn. So the sky is lightening, and I feel as though the load is lightening on the reader as well. And so I feel as though there's a lot more access points in this chapter than there are in book 2. And I think book 2, he tricks you because he gives you all those formatting shifts, which you think are going to help you, but all they do is really bog you down.
100%.
And whereas here, there's none of that, but in many ways. I mean, in many ways, obviously, this is the chapter that focuses entirely on the boys, Sean and Shem. So Sean and John and Sean, Shem, and Izzy feature fairly significantly through here, and so we get. And then we also get a précis, like a reminder of what's come. Plus, Ewicker gets to defend himself here as well. So
it's pretty phenomenal, and I think it just stands out among the three that we've read so far. There's a book that I really enjoy called "Then We Came to the End," and most 97%, 95% of that book is written in third person plural, right? And it's really interesting because since it's written in third person plural, it somehow has the ability to feel really intimate, right? And then I want to say about 3/4 of the way through the book, there's a major shift in style, like dramatically so, where it is first person presentational, right? And it feels like a jolt, and kind of makes you really look at the form of everything that was before and everything that follows. And I feel like the section where the sleepers woke up and looked around the room really felt like a soft restart for me.
Right. Yeah. And we get a lot of that that we can work with while we're discussing it with our guests. We've had lots of really great guests.
We have.
And I feel as though book 3, we really hit our stride as well with bringing, I mean, obviously I don't want to say anything about anyone who was guest in book 1 and 2 because I think everyone's been terrific, but we had Lucy come back, Neil came back, Tommy Mackay was here, Sarah Kane, Seth Austin, Jason Rothery, Patrick Robinson, Nikhil Krishnaswamy, my daughter Bridie, and lots of different people came in to read. And we got so many different voices on this. That really felt as though it was every week. I mean, there was a couple of episodes that was just you and I. There was one that was just me, but I feel as though the guests really, the variety of voices on the Wake really brings different things out. And I feel as though we've kind of perfected that idea of going, okay, every episode needs a different reader to be on this. Because if it's just my voice or if it's just your voice, it becomes kind of a little bit self-indulgent, but really it's about sharing it and also saying to people who maybe would be frightened by it or maybe would be intimidated to say, don't be intimidated. It's just words. It may be the hardest book in the English language, but you can still handle it because it's still the English language.
Yeah. And I want to say that this feels like the book where I felt like we were ingratiated into the community in a really nice way.
Yeah.
I think before we were like, no one's going to listen to it. And then people started listening to it. And then not only did people start listening to it, they started reaching out.
Yeah.
And not to say that like praise and admiration are the end all be all, but to find that people actually appreciate it was refreshing because you and I were both like, this is this, stuffy, almost masturbatory project.
Yeah. Well, and we were so worried about the purists. I think it's another case of the lady doth protest too much when every time I talk about the purist, a lot of it was me covering my butt to say, I'm aware that this isn't perfect, but bear with us. And not a single person yet. I mean, sure, there's someone at home who is shaking their head at this, but I'm sure they're not still listening. But most people, and I'm going to jinx this, by saying it, but we have a perfect 5 out of 5 star rating on all platforms because people who listen go, hey, well done, guys. You've just done a thing. No one has a critique. Everyone's just like, I couldn't have done that. Great. Well done. Thank you for existing. Whereas, and now someone's going to go out and give us 2 stars just to drag our rating down. But yeah, the community to an individual, every single person has said, thank you for continuing the conversation because there's more people should be talking about Joyce. I got a message yesterday on Instagram from one of our listeners who runs a blog, and I'm going to name check it here, and I'll post it in the show notes. He runs a blog called From Swerve of Shore to Bend of Bay, which is obviously from the first page of Finnegans Wake. And he messaged me saying, thank you so much for doing this. I've been inspired by your podcast and Richard Harte's podcast to start including information on Finnegans Wake on my James Joyce blog. And I said, what is it called? And he told me the name. And I said, how have you not got any Finnegans Wake on a blog called From Swerve Assured Bender? And he agreed and laughed. But he was just saying, the fact that it exists means that people go, oh, this is not inaccessible. Even though it is inaccessible, there's still access points. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, are there access points at the inaccessible? Sure. I mean, maybe that's a new tagline. But yeah, I mean, like you say, people have been reaching out. Seth and Tommy both reached out blindly and asked if they could be on the podcast based on their listening. And then we're also now active in a couple of new platforms, including Reddit and YouTube. And that's been amazing too, because on Reddit, I started an account. This was after we talked to Bobby, who basically encouraged us to join Reddit. And I wish I'd done it 6 months ago, because the community there has been fantastic. And yesterday we actually got an official endorsement from r/James Joyce, from the James Joyce community that has 7,000 members. So they posted a sticky on their subreddit saying, we officially endorse Wake. Go listen to Wake. I mean, that's amazing. Like, they don't have to do that. We didn't ask them to do that. So thank you to the moderators at Reddit. And then I also created a YouTube channel. I decided, I didn't have enough to do. So I thought, what I would do is convert every episode of the podcast into a video that for YouTube. And the YouTube channel's exploded. And we have all of these subscribers. We have hundreds of views on some of it. And one of the projects I did was that I put a supercut of every episode of book 1 and then book 2 into a single video. So you can listen to all of book 1 in a single video. It's 10 hours long. With none of our banter in between, with just us reading. And those have hundreds of views already in like a week. People have just... It's
when you said that you did that, I was like, Toby. This is Toby being Toby.
I tend to get obsessive, yeah.
It's okay though. I mean, it's part of the one of the things I love about you is that if I'm going down this rabbit hole, Toby's going to be right there digging next to me, be like, what else is here?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. I keep sort of seeing what else is in there. And we discuss a lot of really useful things week to week. And every time we come up with an interesting topic, I dig into it and I find there's more stuff in there, or someone else is writing about it. And I'd love to amplify them where we can. So we're using that. So on Reddit, we have r/WakePod, which is available. We also r/James Joyce is a really great community. There's also one called r/Ulysses and r/Finnegans Wake. There's all sorts of things out there. And everyone there, everyone has said thank you and welcome. And I post the new episode every week, and without doubt, someone downvotes me. So someone doesn't like it, but that's fine. That's what Reddit's for. Mostly it's upvoted. And then our YouTube channel is youtube.com/@wakepod. No dot in between those. I think I'm done now with adding platforms. I think that's all of our platforms. I'm not going to go to the hellscape that used to be the bird place,
the bird app.
or the Book of Faces. Not going to either any of those places, but we have Instagram for now until it becomes untenable, and but also Reddit and YouTube. But it's good to get the word out as we finish up. And so I'm going to check back on the stats in a year and suddenly find out that we've exploded. That would be nice, but we'll see.
That would be nice.
We'll see. So we have, in book 3, we have 4 chapters that we broke up into a lot of little bits. 3.1 is called Sean. 3.2 is called Jawn. 3.3 is called Yawn. And 3.4 is called Dawn, which I kind of love this titling. It's kind of really important to remember that Joyce didn't come up with any of these titles.
Yeah.
So this is Oxford World Classics and their brethren who are coming up with these kinds of. But I do like the fact that they've got a bit of a sense of humor about it, and at least rhyming the titles. And I think Joyce did come up with some of the titles when he was publishing them, and I think a lot of the editors took the names that he would refer to chapters in letters and correspondence and say, well, when I've just finished writing An Olivia Pluribel, they took those titles, and the different scholars have different names for it. And in the Bernard Benstock book, Joyce Against Wake, he has a list of all the different names that they give all the different chapters. I'm not going to go into it now because that's boring. But yeah, an interesting kind of take on the fact that we have this kind of evolution, these characters morphing, Sean, John, Yawn, Dawn.
I do think that is fun. I also love the fact that you're pointing out that this is almost imposed by scholars to some degree, because I think that part of the fun is not knowing exactly what Joyce meant.
Yeah.
And like, so trying to put meaning within the titles, because, you know, it's impossible to not try to evaluate a piece of writing based on this title, right? I think is really interesting. But it is helpful in this case. Especially as we head towards the end of the book and thinking of Dawn, and also thinking about, like, if this is a book about dreams, why is book 4 so short? Because the dream is over, you know?
Right. Yeah. And, you know, if the dreamer has awakened at the end of book 3, then book 4 is more that he's dozing, or it's that those dreams you have after the alarm clock goes off, but before you're fully conscious. So that'll be interesting, something to keep an eye on. And then of course we're looping back to book 1.
Yeah.
By the end. So yeah, we have interesting things. Book 3.2 is the long, absurd, and rather incestuous Lenten lecture to Izzy, which, you know. Okay. So it's a lot of big noting.
We called that out. Yeah. We were like, this should not be happening.
Yeah. Then we have book 3, 3.3 with the inquiry run as a seance by Senators 4, which really, I mean, and so that was a real reminder of all the things that have come before in that chapter, or in that book, earlier in the book. And then finally, the chapter we talked about in last episode, talking about how we shift from surrealism to realism, and we called that out as maybe just editorial speak, because in terms of the realism of it all, you know, I know my dramatic structure, and
that ain't realism.
So yeah, I mean, maybe it's just not naturalism. Maybe that's what maybe there's that. There are obviously bits of realism in there, and we mix it up with naturalism sometimes. But yeah, it's.
But I also think that we have to remember that this is postmodernism, like,
yes,
on display. So even fragments of realism are still mutated and mutilated.
And obviously, as a modernist, Joyce was really helping define the field and what was going on, and so it wasn't. But like you say, it's interesting because he started writing this in 1922. And he finished in 1939. And so there are a lot of genre shift that's happening through the 20s and 30s. And so he's writing at a point where the prevailing dramatic forms that we're seeing on stages around Europe have changed immeasurably. And then with the rise of Nazism and the way that the political scene is going, obviously there is going to be that shift. But so it's interesting. Book 3 is 187 pages long, which is almost exactly the same length as book 2 at 186 pages. So interesting. Whereas book 1 is 213 pages. So we have them all at a fairly even length, but it's interesting that book 2, the shortest chapter, almost felt like the longest chapter.
It did. And I was just thinking about that. And I think it is all because of Night Lessons. Night Lessons felt like it was a Herculean task.
It's crazy. It was, and putting it together and the way that we structured it, and the thing that I was talking about earlier about putting together the YouTube videos is that one of the things to do in order to turn all of the episodes into because I work on GarageBand where they have multiple tracks, and so I can export things. But what I do in order to extract just the reading section is I create a new version and then join everything up and then just extract. But with that one, I had a track that had just your dialogue on it.
That's right.
So I had to go through piece by piece and take every interjection of yours and pop it up into cut the above one point. Because if you put them on, if you have them on multiple tracks and then you join them, it'll overwrite one or the other. So yeah,
I'm sorry.
That was a bad morning. It was a couple of hours of just going through and just like taking all of the bits and pieces and editing together. Yeah. I mean, it and then the way that we did it, I'm glad about the way we did it. I think having Neil there was a real boon because Neil is really grounding and really clear about how a lot of this stuff should go. And I think the plan that we had, which was that we all switched off on the readings, and obviously now we're talking about book 2 when we're in the book 3 summary, but even so, I'm still not quite sure we nailed it.
Right.
I think for the reader, for most of book 3, they get what's on the page. You don't need a copy of the book in front of you. If we always suggest you have a book in front of you, that'll make it easier. But if you didn't have a copy of the book in front of you for night lessons, you'd be lost, because not only do we switch perspectives, but there was no production in terms of, because I for a while I was like, oh, maybe I can put like an effect on the footnote, voices or something, and then I just went, who cares, and didn't do it because really, I mean, we got other things to do as well. So yeah, so book 3 felt like there was a lot. It was a lot more straightforward stuff going on.
Yeah, which I think I needed. Right.
Yeah.
And that it was a fear of like when I watch my Hollow Drive, after a while, I'm like, I just need something to like hold on to. Right.
Yeah. And that gives, and Joyce gives us that something to hold on to, which is something very, very important. But yeah. And then the other thing that we got throughout book 3, as we were going, is that we got guests that really elevated our conversations and understanding. So we had Anna come in, Zoe came in, we had the Christmas episode, the Guinness episode. We started to really sort of dig into the text and sort of figure out what it was all going to look like. And so the bonus episodes have been really kind of thrilling to present, just because we've had those opportunities to examine the text from other perspectives while we're reading. So it hasn't felt like like an echo chamber right. in the way that it did early on. And so having a lot of those senses, that's been really great. We also had Bobby, who came in to talk to us about the Maybe Night event, which was terrific, and it's really just good to get those perspectives so that we have when we're reading, we can sort of break it down even better. And I found as though, I mean, particularly in the Maybe Night episode was to being able to participate in that celebration during the reading of book 3. Not only did I get a tip during that reading, someone saying, well, of course, in this chapter, this is the chapter that the dreamer wakes. And I went, are you serious? We're reading that one tomorrow. Oh, and so I stole that idea from someone else and put it into the episode, because great. I mean, and I mentioned that in the meeting, and they were like, perfect, go do that. But there's a lot of different things. I mean, just being able to dig into a sense that people are arguing about when the sleeper is dreaming, what night it was, is really interesting too. Like Bob, we did it on the solstice night, the longest night of the year. There's other examples. I've already talked about this book in passing, but this I'm going to promote it here. We have this book here called Multiple Joyce, which is written by David Collard, who is not a scholar. You can see all of my tags in there. I've got little post-it notes all the way through it. But David Collard has a really interesting perspective on it, because he reckons that it takes place on the 4th of July, which is really curious, because that's it will be quite a short night, middle of summer. And that Joyce said that was his idea of when it would be, because that was his father's birthday and then Joyce's wedding day, which feels like a little bit like a sentimental kind of thing. But I think that also links up with the idea that Bloomsday happens on the day of his first date with Nora Barnacle. So I guess that very much makes sense. There are other perspectives that Collard points out, which is great. He says that Nathan Halper suggests that it's on March 18th, 1922. Like, he really narrows it into that, which he bases on, and this is so good, he bases it on the interpretation of almanacs and phases of the moon. So that's great. It's great. So as though the phase of the moon has something to do with what the dreamer is experiencing in the dream. Whereas Peter Reichenberg suggests that it's actually set on what he called Earwicker's Night, on 7th of April 1928, which was based on, this is another amazing one, it's based on the fragments of the soccer scores that are included in the text. So there are a few moments in the text where the radio says the score between Liverpool and Everton or whatever it is 1-0. So he went through all of the scores and found the days when those scores happened, and he decided that it was the 7th of April, 1928. And then Collard himself observes what he calls Finnig Night on the anniversary of the book's publication on May 4th. I don't think any of those are likely to be as unifying as Bloomsday.
No, I think it's just it's just extremely difficult when Bloomsday is like, here it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Right.
I mean, yeah, and the fact that you can kind of track Bloomsday makes sense because Bloom moved around Dublin that day in the text, and so you can kind of follow him around if you want. But the dreamer is in bed, and the adventuring is in his head. So,
This is a question that this just posed to me, and I've started to think about in book 3 in particular. Is we have attributed just a level of like factual trust to the dreamer, right?
Yeah.
And we often talk about like the untrustworthy narrator and like all these things. I think that, at least for me, part of the reason why I have been so willing to just be like, yeah, this is probably what it is because dreams feel so unfiltered as far as like being able to put a spin on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I dream about something, because it's working in my subconscious, I am an active participant in my own imagination, my own thought process, right? As opposed to me being able to mutilate or like make sense of a perspective. And so even if we're thinking about going back to like, Artaud and the idea of like going back to our base ideas and creature comforts, the whole concept of hinting at incestuous love affairs feels very much like, and I am not in conscious control of these thoughts, right?
Yeah. And
so I think that is an aspect that I just started thinking about, and end of thought.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's very easy to forget that it's the dream. I think we can reassure ourselves when we're lost to go, oh, it's a dream. But when you're reading it, it's like waking up from a bad dream and that relief that you feel that, oh, the thing that was so real wasn't real.
Right.
The disaster that I dreamed of, the thing that happened that I was running away from, or I was struggling to complete, or the death that I witnessed. None of it happened. It was all in my mind. And it's questions of whether that's anxiety or why we dream the way where we dream is up for another episode. But yeah, we tend to put our full faith in it and then go, oh, Sean and Shem, these horrible people. But then, and that's it. Yeah, and
because it feels like abject truth whenever you were dreaming it.
Yeah.
It feels like absolute truth in reality. And
it's so fascinating. Just the whole concept of dreaming is just so...
Yeah.
Yeah. And
the book presents everything as factual. Even the accusations, right? It's like, this is what people are saying. This isn't a book that says, this is maybe what people are saying, or this is maybe where the letter went, or this is... Right? Mm-hmm. It's presented to us as like, people are saying this, people are doing X, Y, and Z. This is what ACE is doing. This, and we are able to go from a conversation around being able to hear, soccer scores in the background as you quietly wake up, to the lineage of someone begetting someone, it just feels all factual and connected.
Yeah. And then obviously there's the very unreliable narrator of the dream, because a lot of these books that that try to tell you what's happening in what bit, and then they're baffled by the fact they go, but this character is representative of this Greek god figure. He doesn't really go down that road, but he represents this biblical figure, or this figure in Irish mythology, but he also represents this other one who was his brother. How does one character represent two figures in history? Yeah. And you go, well, he can, because it's a dream, and because it's always morphing and evolving, as opposed to something like dramaturgically. And this is why early on we talked about dramatic adaptations of this, about why they're always going to fail, because they can only ever really render a single version, and they're probably only going to render the human.
100%.
The family narrative, and that's pretty much it. Of going, oh, it's about Finnegans Wake. We're going to replicate a guy in a coffin and then a fight with whiskey, and that's going to be Finnegans Wake. You go, well, that's one surface layer, but the actual story is so much deeper than that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like whenever Doctor Strange like pushes someone's soul out of their body and they have that echo, right? Yeah. Like there's a level of depth to it that I don't think that you can actually capture in a 2D format that is film, right?
Yeah.
And I mean 2D as in like the script can only get so deep because you can only give so many illusions, because there's like and at some point in time you have to tie it down to some sort of language and image that is static, even if for a moment, right? Mm-hmm. And within the world of the dream, and I think book 3 absolutely demonstrated this, is that there's a glimpse of the world outside of it, mm-hmm. which feels so stark and clean and absolute and definable. But the second we start to drift back in and out, we feel this pull between the very solid and then the world that is like multitudinous, you know?
Yeah.
And because we start in that world of multitudinous, like we don't realize that we're in it until he's like, but wait, we've breached the surface. And now when you go back down, like you can appreciate the depth more.
Right. Absolutely. And that metaphor becomes something you get stuck on and trying very hard. Who does everyone represent at this certain point? And eventually you just say, they represent everyone. They represent no one. They represent certain characters at certain times. And that can shift from page to page. You get used to it. And so if you're trying to nail it down, and I think a lot of people, look, this is why we don't like the Oxford World Classic. And we've said it. Come for us, Oxford World Classics.
It flattens it.
You are trying to flatten it out, and you're trying to tell us what's happening, but you're not telling us everything. It's what's happening. You're telling us what you're just giving us a plot summary, but there's no plot to summarize. I mean, maybe there is. I mean, it's helped us get through, I guess. But what it does, it also lets you off the hook for interpretation. It says, we've told you what it's about. Stop looking for what it's about. Whereas you go, hang on, there's 12 other layers here. And maybe that's why the reading group in California took 28 years to read it, because they were actually trying to find those levels, and good for them. I think the other thing that's really interesting that came up in my research recently, and I don't do a lot of research, but I tinker around and find things that are interesting, is that I came across a Wake enthusiast called Peter Quadrino, who has a Wake reading group in Austin, Texas. And he has a blog which is really interesting, and he has a lot of really interesting information about showing different kinds of images that represent the different structures of the wakes, and that's all really, really cool. And I'll link to that stuff in the show notes. But he drew my attention to an article that I found so mind blowing that I couldn't quite believe. You know, it was kind of like the article that I brought up earlier about how they measured all of the lengths of sentences and found that it was exactly uniformed across the board once you average it all out.
Which is insane.
This is insane. Whereas this one, he talks about an article written by a scholar named Katarzyna Bazanik, but she wrote an article called Joyce, Literature and Writing of the Book. And she has the theory that the text is designed to be a simulacrum of the entire planet based on things that are mentioned at certain points in the book. So the fact that it goes in a circle, so that the first page is the North Pole, and as we go around through the book, we get to certain points on the compass rose until we get back to north at page 628. So she suggests that we can visualize it as a book opened in such a way that its covers are joined, while its radially extending pages form a circle. So like this. So I'm just opening a book here. So it's sort of like that with all the book pages. And so you can read it in that circle. And so what this Bazanik did was the designer first, she said it's confirmed by the fact that the design of the first edition, which bore the same lettering on the front and back covers, not to mention the final uncompleted sentence linking to the opening line of the book. And better still, she also suggests that not only does this view of the text give new implications to its length of 628 pages as representing the circumference of a circle.
3.14 times 2.
Yeah. So, but the shape of the text can now be viewed geographically as a shape sphere. She points to a number of references to various polar regions appearing around pages 627, 628, 3, and 4, while in the middle of the text, the South Pole on the map appears references to a bunch of polar explorers and vessels.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's like, I mean, I have so much respect for scholars who pull crazy stuff out and then publish them, and I would love to think that this is what Joyce has in mind. It's very likely that it's a coincidence, and there's like a little map there. I don't know if you see it in the doc there, but there's this little map that I'll put onto our show notes that shows where each page comes in the in that circle, so you can sort of like look at the geographical region. So page 15 is at the east, and 471 is at the west. So.
That's crazy to me. And, the reason it's crazy isn't for a bad reason, obviously. I'm just like, this is shocking. This feels like there's a level of me that hopes it's intentional deeply.
Yeah.
Right? But then there's another level of me that's like, and a growing wonder of this book and the fact that, like, you really can take whatever you want out of it.
Oh, yeah.
Which just can't be said about a multitude of books.
Right. And it reminds me of back when I was a Shakespearean. I was on a Shakespeare distribution list, like the most famous of Shakespeare distribution lists, which is called Shakespeare. And it was scholars from everywhere just sort of basically just tearing each other down all the time. And there was this one scholar who would post, and I don't even remember his name, and I'm sure he's no longer around. There's one scholar who would post every week with his theory that Shakespeare was Jewish. And he knew that Shakespeare was Jewish because he was reading through a codex the works of Shakespeare and pulling out random words and putting them all together in sentences. And then that was corresponding to text things from Jewish holy texts. And so he was like, so as you can see, Shakespeare was putting encoded messages, and it was illegal to be Jewish in England in the 16th century, so he had to hide it this way. And so he was like, so what you need to do is you need to go in and pull out every 15th word. So if you go into the Merchant of Venice and pull out every 15th word and put them in it, but except in Act 3, Scene 2, don't pull out every 15th word. It has to be every 6th word. And so he started changing the rules and just shifting around and being like, it works, but you have to, ignore that one. That one doesn't count. And you can't include speech headings. And you can. So, and eventually you're like, man, you're just finding what you want to find, which, good luck to him. But I don't think anyone really believes that Shakespeare.
I would then have questions about, like, which folio are you using? Like,
well, and not taking into account the fact that Shakespeare had nothing to do with the typesetting. This is why everyone's like, you got to perform the folio text. I'm like, brother, Shakespeare had been dead for 7 years by the time the folio came out. He had nothing to do with the typesetting of that book. And so to suggest that that Shakespeare was putting these messages in, but we don't have any of Shakespeare's foul papers, which is his handwritten texts. And then we don't have any of his transcriptions. We don't have any of we have some quartos, but then it was all to do with typesetters, and then actors were adding stuff in performance and going back and forth. So some of the plays that are in the folio, Shakespeare may be like, oh, that's the one you wrote down. That's not actually the one I wrote. I think it's almost certainly that. Anyway, so to suggest that you take the folio as some kind of mystical holy text and then you pull it out as though he had his hands on it, I think it's the same thing with the Wake, given the fact that we have fairly good... the good authority we have is from Lucy, and I keep meaning to check this, is that Lucy was saying that the books were written out of order. Yeah. And that book 3 was written second and book 2 was written third, if that was maybe the order she was talking about. But if that's the case, that blows this out of the water.
100%.
But I mean, maybe not. Maybe toward the end he was doing that, and I would think if that was what he was hoping to do, and if the theory that Bobby has that Joseph Campbell got notes from Sylvia Beach or from Joyce when he was putting his skeleton key together, surely that would be in there. Surely that That at least that would be in there. But then someone had, there was a quote that I read somewhere where someone said, "What's Joyce? What's Ulysses about? Can you tell me?" And he said, "I can't tell you because then you won't get to discover what it's about. I can't." It was some kind of quotation where he said, "If I tell you, then what's the point? You need to find it. You need to study it." So maybe that's
it. Yeah, but I think there is something about. I mean, any book that you really love, you can definitely find something connected to in some way, shape, or form. I mean, there's a whole industry of, sewing quotes onto pillows from obscure novels in the 16th century because it's like, and it applies to today. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of bending and that you have to do to make that happen, which again isn't a bad thing. I think that these things can absolutely exist, and these theories exist, and these concepts are there, and I actually think it's a lot of fun, the continual exploration of it. Yeah, and I think that what has made our process so fun for me is that we are looking at we're both very text-based driven individuals, but we're looking at just what do the words stir up in us, if anything, at any given time.
Yeah,
and even if this was his goal, right, to create the world, and I know that he said that all of humanity is in this book, right, mm-hmm. which could then be applied to this theory. I think that part of it is the author's ability to say, but I still have to create something that speaks to my vision on multiple levels. Again, it's that flattening, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's certain things like we talked earlier on in book 1 about how he put in all the names of all the bodies of water he could find into the Olivia chapter. And then later people came to him and said, "We found 50 more." And he was like, "Cool. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks."
Right.
Now that you're looking for them, you're seeing them everywhere. So yeah, I mean, people are going to find what they want to find. It's like Bobby was talking about how people found evidence that Joyce predicted the bombing of Nagasaki.
And so doubt it, but
no, that's a coincidence. There's no way. I mean, obviously, if you start suggesting that Joyce is Nostradamus, then not, Nostradamus himself, we just, it's all very convenient to sort of, it's like reading your horoscope.
Yeah, if you say, you know what, today is going to be a struggle.
Yeah. Or you read it and you think, yeah, I do have a big presentation up. That could be the high stakes that you mentioned in my. You just fit it to whatever you want it to fit. Yeah,
it's fun, but we can't put too much credence in it.
Well, I think it's the product of there being such a dedicated niche group of scholars who are connected to this, who are not necessarily mainstream. The conferences aren't giant. And I think most Joyceans are seen as being kind of oddballs because the content is so inaccessible in so many ways. Whereas a Shakespearean, you can go to the Shakespeare Association of America conference where you have literally 1,500 Shakespeareans in a room, which is horrifying, and Lord, do they know how to drink. I haven't been to an SA in a while, and I've been to a few of them with the International Shakespeare Association and things like that. But you go to those, and you got people there who are hardcore Shakespeareans, but you've also got people who just kind of like A Midsummer Night's Dream. And so it's accessible somewhere. Whereas Joyce, sure, the Dubliners is accessible in many ways, and there are plenty of people in Dublin who are thriving on the tourist industry about Joyce, But yeah, it's people who are fairly passionate. And one of the people who I came across on the subreddit is a user named Furina, who is, she describes herself as a, quote, devout, religious, or even filthy Joycean, which I love. And so what she's been doing is she's been going around and discovering unpublished Joyce content and documents, things that are only available in archives or aren't available haven't been typeset before. And so she's been putting them all together and publishing them online and putting them into the subreddit, and so every time you go into the subreddit, there's a new typeset of a poem or a letter, it's really interesting. So there's lots of different things. So she's a handful of different things, and I'm not going to mention all of them, but I will list them all. There's about 12 of them here, major ones that she asked me to talk about in the show notes, and that include things like Christmas Eve, which I talked about in the Christmas episode, which ended up becoming a story in Dubliners. There's a holograph manuscripts of the dead, which come from the Yale collections, original versions of stories that are in the Dubliner, extracts from letters between him and Harry Shaw Weavers, and parodies, like a parody of Eliot's The Wasteland. So lots of different interesting things. Like Joyce was a really curious, playful kind of guy. There's a version of his only other musical composition other than Percy O'Reilly, which is called Bid Adieu. So lots of different kinds of things that he's got. But the main things I wanted to talk about is that he has two different things. She has two different things that she's published which are Wake related. The first one is the full text, part 1 and part 2 of something called Finn's Hotel, which was sketches of the work in progress that were written in Paris and Bognor Regis in 1923. So these were PDFs of these original publications, and so if anyone was a Wake scholar, comparing these two texts is very useful. And then the other one, the most interesting one I find, is from C.K. Ogden, who did a translation of the last 4 pages of Anna Livia Pluribel. So the last 4 pages of ALP, that closing chapter of book 1, as supervised by Joyce. So Joyce sat in a room with this guy, C.K. Ogden, and helped him translate the Anna Livia section into plain English or basic English. And so this just suggests that Joyce had a version of the book in his mind that was in basic English that then he corrupted, like we've talked about, taking a word, finding different things. So that's really interesting perspective on this translation of Joyce, this idea of how do you normalize it. So here's a and there's been other ones, like there was a book that I found online called a recent publication called Here Comes Everybody's Karma, which was a translation where with an intention to quote open Joyce's opus magnum for a wider reading public by replacing the foreign language idiosyncrasies with an English equivalent and by streamlining Joyce's Sibylline prose. So I'm not sure about that one. I haven't looked at that one, but I wanted to look at Ogden's one just briefly here because I wanted to just speak both the final paragraph of both, just to see what we hear. So just give me your perspective on what you think. Okay, so here is Joyce, the original. Can't hear with the waters of, the chittering waters of, flittering bats, field mice balk talk. Ho, are you not gone a-home? What, Tom Malone? Can't hear with balk of bats, all them liffying waters of? Ho, talk save us, my foos won't moose. I feel as old as yonder elm. A tale told of Sean or Shem? All Livia's daughter sons. Dark hawks near us. Night, night. My hoe head hauls. I feel as heavy as yonder stone. Tell me of John or Sean. Who were Shem and Sean the living sons or daughters of? Night now. Tell me, tell me, tell me, elm. Night, night. Tell me tale of stem or stone. Beside the rivering waters of, hithering, dithering waters of, night. So that's the final paragraph of the Anna Livia chapter, which we're familiar with. And this is the translation. Let's see if it's worth the effort. No sound but the waters of, the dancing waters of, winged things in flight, field rats, louder than talk. Ho, are you not gone, ho? What, Tom Malone? No sound but the noise of these things, the Liffey and all its waters of. Ho, talk safe keep us. There's no moving this, my foot. I seem as old as that tree over there. A story of Sean or Shem, but where? All Livia's daughters and sons. Dark birds are hearing. Night, night. My old head's bent. My weight is like that stone you see. What may the John Sean story be? Or who were Shem and Sean the living sons and daughters of? Night now. Say it, tree. Night, night. The story say of stem or stone, by the side of the river waters of, this day and that way, waters of, night.
It reminds me of it feels like a contemporary version of poetry. You know what I mean? Like, but I also don't know. This is controversial. I don't know if because it isn't a complete translation, quote unquote, that flattens the language, makes sense of the sentence structure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I wonder about the necessity of the exercise.
Yeah, me too. I look at it and I think, well, what are we losing? Like, we're getting those moments where you're taking something out that feels, tell me, elm becomes say it, tree. I don't.
Tell me, elm is more poetic.
It is. And I don't see what the benefit is here necessarily. I mean, obviously there is benefit, and obviously Joyce felt there was a benefit because this was authorized by Joyce, and Joyce was involved with this. This was the same guy who did the recording of Joyce.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but it feels like there are enough. There are tiny shifts enough to make the scholars happy, where they can look and go, oh, look at the parallels. And the parallel text stuff is what I used to do all the time when I was at grad school. But in terms of this, I mean, it feels a little bit like No Fear Shakespeare.
It does, which we have often talked about our issues with No Fear Shakespeare.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, or the Julian Fellowes Romeo and Juliet. Like I said, the way that he dumbed down the Shakespearean text because he felt like the regular audiences wouldn't understand it. And I don't know if this needs it. I think if this was something that was radically different, and I was kind of hoping it would be radically different, the fact that it's not is kind of almost as interesting as anything else.
Yeah, it's like if the first sentence had read, "No, but the sounds of the dancing waters sounding like winged things in flight," right? Then I'd be like, okay,
yeah,
I see the point. But like, there's still those stops, there's still those periods.
Yeah, and it's very staccato, which is, I guess, very much the point. I mean, maybe if I had sampled the first paragraph of each, it might be different. But
yeah,
but, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, I think there's a lot of this. I mean, I think finding these moments, these gaps, is kind of what all scholarship is around, because generally the idea of scholarship is that you're trying to insert an original piece of scholarship into the conversation and coming up with something that's original. Like, there's nothing new under the sun. So how do you do that? Like, there's one guy who I found named John Gordon who has his whole raison d'etre is he's working with each page of the Wake, and he's basically defining every single thing that he can find. And then he goes to the Roland McHugh wrote a book called Annotations to Finnegans Wake, which is essentially the Bible of annotations. Obviously, we haven't read it, but but he's going there and he's basically finding all the things that aren't in McHugh, and then he's got a website where you can find all of his things that are like filling in the gaps in between. And all of this is on a website, which again, I'll link to. It's currently out of service, I found, but I'm going to link to a Wayback Machine version. So you'll be able to look at that. So yeah, it's interesting. And then there's other ones like I found out another resource that came up on the Reddit called which is a open access book called The Collected Epiphanies of James Joyce, which is interesting. It's a sort of a focus on epiphany throughout, because that becomes kind of a major theme. Obviously, in Dubliners, epiphany appears in every chapter, and then there's plenty of it in Ulysses and Portrait, and then enough of it in Wake too. So there's plenty in there. I don't want to really go into anything that's in that, but it exists, and it's an open access book that's quite interesting. You can download it as a PDF. So yeah, lots of ways to interpret the Wake, and book 3 gave us plenty of access to that, which was really
and I think that book 3 for me allowed for the most interpretation for self. I'm gonna say something dangerous. I get why people like will finish it and start right back up again, because I think that I remember when we first entered book 1, we're like, HCE, all these things, it's probably fake. It's probably like, they're probably just saying things. And then by the time we got to book 3, you and I were both like, HCE is dirty. Like, this man is filthy. He did all this. Like they're all saying the truth. And I think that is, it almost feels like a mystery or thriller movie in that respect, where the really smart ones give you everything, but leave you that shadow of doubt.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you're like, it was all there. And it was up to me to make that decision. And I feel like book 3 just solidified some things for me, you know?
Yeah, and I think going back, I also think that by the time we get to this point, we have so many more weapons in our arsenal for attacking the text. So being able to take our book 3 reading skills back to book 1 and go, okay, I'm not daunted by this in the same way I was. 'Cause when you're on page 4, all you can think about is there's 624 pages to go. I can't do this. But once you've gone through it once, maybe that becomes less important. I also feel as though there's more of a tendency to jump around the second time through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if there's a there's a future in the version of Wake where we, on our second loop through, it's about throwing a dart at a dartboard and then picking a random page and then just focusing on that. I mean, there's plenty of ways you could do it, but the way that we interpret it comes. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who spend their whole lives reading this and going back and forth. I was pointed out to someone on Instagram, I think, brought up someone named Ben Watson, who has been a voice in the Finnegans Wake discourse out there. And he wrote a really interesting article called Finnegans Wake versus Theory, which I found and quite enjoyed. And it contains this great piece of analysis. And I thought this was really interesting to bring up at this point. He says, what so many commentaries on the Wake miss is how scurrilous, parodic, and angry so much of it is. This is a portrait of a ridiculous, over-educated buffoon, a Slavoj Žižek, stabbing his toast with a fork in order to explain space-time. It evinces the same skepticism about world pictures which activated Frank Zappa and Philip K. Dick. Finnegans Wake is not high art in the vein of T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. It's low-down smut, an explosion of ribaldry versus privilege, as countercultural as R. Crumb, and similarly grotesque, obscene, and hilarious.
Yeah. And I think that quote says what my issue is with Oxford World Classics summaries, right? Is that the more we've read it and the more we've gotten used to language and the way Joyce lays things out, we've been like, this is funny, this is dirty, this is filthy. I understand why this book was banned because people are like, the scandal of it all, right? And Oxford World's Classic seems to feel like it is trying to present it in a purely academic sense. Mm-hmm. And it removes the fun from the book. And I think that is one thing that I have grown to just really enjoy about this book is that it is fun. It's dense, but it's fun. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, you can very clearly see that Joyce is having fun. And can you imagine working on a project for 17 years and maintaining the fun throughout 17 years? You gotta have fun. Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, this Watson guy is pretty funny. He has this open access radio broadcast that he does in which Watson intersperses readings from Joyce with the music of Frank Zappa. You know, and why not? Like, I don't know if there's a way of you know, people used to listen to Dark Side of the Moon and watch Wizard of Oz.
I was in a theater production where we synced the two, and I just performed The Wizard of Oz
nice.
to Dark Side of the Moon. It was awful.
Yeah. I'm sure. Most theater is. Let's be real. Another radio voice actually that came up in my work is quite interesting. This man named Simon Loekle, who for 19 years, so he was a DJ, and every year he planned he inserted into his show, his radio show, an hour on the Wake. So he was planning to do it. So Simon would spend as much as 2 months preparing for his, quote, "As I Please, the Year Out Wake show," which took place on the final Saturday of every year, the final hour or so of which we dedicated to a few pages from Finnegans Wake. Had fate's fickle finger not forced such an early departure, we might have seen an earlier completion than 2065. For Simon was in fact starting to pick up the pace. So he used to do these things. He did them for 19 years before he died. So he did not get there. But he was starting in 1996. It was going to take him until 2065.
That's crazy.
At that rate. So sadly, he didn't make it. However, that is from our friends at Fweet. All of the recordings of his readings from those 19 years are available on Fweet for people to listen to. So
that's cool.
His legacy remains. And hat tip to Simon Loekle for his his service. Oh man, can you imagine? I mean, it's interesting. We have talked to people over the course of this podcast who have dedicated their whole lives to this, have been working on it for their whole lives, and will probably work on it until they die. I don't know. Like, I think someone. So I was talking to someone about this recently, and I've always described myself as a Shakespearean. It's just been the easiest thing. I have a PhD in Shakespearean textual analysis. So, and I've performed in enough Shakespeare and dramaturged enough Shakespeare that I feel as though I'm a pretty good Shakespearean. Mm-hmm. And someone the other day said, "So you're a Joycean now?" And it sort of blew my hair back a little bit, because I thought, am I? Is that, am I allowed to be? Because I feel as though I'm always going to be a Shakespearean. But I don't know. I've become quite obsessed with the Wake and Joyce while we've been doing this. I'm not sure about a lifelong fixation, but maybe I don't have a choice in it. Maybe the Wake has got me now. I mean, in its thrall.
I think there's two different types of people, right? Those who absolutely dedicate their lives to one thing, or those who don't mind and actually take joy out of the exploration of all things, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it was funny, this morning I was like, I think when I'm done teaching, I wouldn't mind working in a bakery. Like,
awesome.
It's something simple like that where I'm like, and that's okay. Yeah. And I think that there's value in both of them. I think you are like me, where you see behind me, I have 3D printers, and that's because for 3 years I was obsessed with 3D printing. Do I still use them? Yes. Right? Yeah. Do I still have knowledge that I hold about them? Yes. But for 3 years I was like, teach me everything. I'd learned everything. I'd purchased 5 3D printers in that time, and I think that this almost feels like this to me, right? Like, we're in it and we know where the end is. And just because we know where the end is doesn't mean that we are going to evacuate all that knowledge and all that passion as soon as we reach it. But I do think that, at least for me, I can then say, I know about Joyce. I am in no way a Joycean, in the same way that, like, I have dedicated most of my life to theater, but I wouldn't say I know everything about theater. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, I know a lot about playwriting, but also I completely realize that that's the phase of my life and my creative practice that I'm in right now. Yes. That could change in 2 months. Who knows? And I think I'm okay with that. I think that there is just as much to be said about the individual who moves on from something and fully dives into something else, as there is to be said about the individual who dedicates themselves to one thing. And I think that the thing that this podcast has been really successful at is that we have merged the two worlds. We've been able to reach out and make contact with the individuals who have dedicated their lives to Joyce and this text. And we have showed as laymen that we can still have a conversation with them. We can learn things, and we can still laugh at the butt jokes, and that's okay. And then when we walk away from this, we still have this community that we can tap back into if we're curious, but we also don't have to be the ones to pursue that, because we recognize who is.
Yeah. And it's the thing I like is that we've also, I mean, not to get into self-congratulatory mode, but I feel as though we could have just brought in purists and experts and professors and scholars, but we also brought in Jordan, and we brought in Natalie and my kids and my parents.
Eiley.
Eiley, all sorts of really great people who, those episodes, I don't think anyone would listen to those episodes and go, oh, skip that one because they don't have anything to say in that episode. Like, no one would say that episode with Eiley, we didn't say anything, even though Eiley came in being like, what do you guys want me to do? Sure. Okay, sure. And she did it as a favor to us, and we all had fun, and we all laughed a bit, and we all talked about what we discovered, but it wasn't predicated on having someone in the room who's an expert. We didn't need Neil every episode. Like, if we had Neil call into every episode and listen quietly until we got stuck, it would be a different podcast. Yeah. And so there are some times where people, like, there are some podcasts that set up where the host is an idiot and they bring in an expert, and the whole concept is, teach me about the thing you're an expert in. And that's a fine idea, but I don't think we've been trying to do that. But when we have, what we've done is we've ramped ourselves up. So when we finally get experts in, we can hold our own with them, and we can punch back, and we understand what's going on, and our insight is actually useful. And then we end up getting, referenced in a doctoral thesis. Thank you, Zoe. So
yeah, and I think that part of it is reminding everyone that you start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And that whenever you learn the sport of baseball, you do not know what a home run is, right? But then you learn the term, and then you're like, okay, cool. You do not know what an RBI is. There are things that you do not know, and that is okay. But part of the joy is experiencing it around people who also don't know the thing. It's why we go to school, right? It's why we sit in classes with other individuals, because we're all reading this text, and then maybe we'll come back next week, and maybe our professor will tell us what it is, but you and I both know a good professor would turn to you and say, and what did you think about it?
Yeah.
Right. And so that scratching of the curiosity, I think, is the thing that I've most enjoyed. And I think that, like with any good lesson or learning of anything, it takes a while to get in the groove. And then when you walk away from it, you're like, okay, this wasn't that bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think early on, we were very worried about what it was all going to be. And I mean, I don't know if you remember, but how about this for a throwback?
We thought we were going to use that. I was convinced. I told you, I was like, cue that button up.
That we used to. If you listen back through our back catalogue, don't do that. It's why would you do that? But you'll notice that in the first 4 or 5 episodes, I take a lot of time saying to the guests, now don't worry, you can tap out anytime, just tell us. And and we used it once, and the only reason we used it is because Eiley got lost on the page. And it wasn't because she was lost. It was because she just got lost, and she was like, actually, and then so she gave me the tap out sign because she couldn't figure out where she was. And so I jumped in for her for half a page, but it wasn't for any other reason. But I think she glanced, I think one of her kids came in the room or something, and she just glanced up and then couldn't figure out where she would come back to. And that's
which we've talked about. Like,
we do it all the time. Absolutely.
We're like, where are we? Oh, no.
But we thought that tap out button was something we would need. And I really felt as though that was kind of because I felt as though I was asking too much of our guests. Because I felt as though I could ask you to do anything and you'd do it, pretty much. Whereas asking a guest, like asking Jordan, who I have still never met in person, I love Jordan, but I don't want to say to him, hey, I'm going to humiliate you on my podcast. You cool with that? Because I really thought that some people would come in and would be like, I can't get through 3 sentences and you're making me look like an idiot. What are you, I really thought that there was going to be some examples of that, and there hasn't been a single example of that yet. Not one reader has come in and got to the end of a paragraph and been like, this is the worst thing in the world. My 12-year-old was fine. My nephew, it's amazing how accessible the inaccessible can be if you just allow yourself to access it.
Yeah. It's
and forgive yourself knowledge and meaning.
Yeah, and the fact that we're not experts 100% helps with that, because we're like, I don't know what that word is either. Have fun,
exactly.
As opposed to entering the space, and if, like you said, if there was an expert there all the time, I think that there'd be a level of judgment that I think that we would even put on ourselves. Of like, sure, it'd be one of those things. This is a cold reading. JK, I read it 5 times before we got on.
Or if I went back in and overdubbed all of the mistakes that we made, in the cut, suddenly you hear a different background noise, and I'm.
You're like, it's actually this word.
I will say there's only been one section I've ever re-recorded. I re-recorded. So this was back in the days when I had changed computers and my settings were wrong. And so that I was peaking like just crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And it was during the Aunt and the Grace Hopper section that there was this great moment, this great long speech that was such a great speech, and we all really enjoyed the hearing of it. But it was unlistenable because I had really gone to town. I really raised my voice, and it was so peaky that it was just impossible. So I just went back in and just re-recorded it because I went, well, this one section, it's just my voice. I hate how I sound because the production is so bad. So I'm not hiding any of that. That's something that I did just to make sure that it was actually listenable. But
you had already read it, so it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And so I re-recorded it, and I did it in one take. I think I might have made mistakes in the re-record. But yeah, I mean, when we're not here trying to get into the Guinness Book of World Records for the most perfect reading of Finnegans Wake. I think Richard's podcast is the podcast to listen to if you want that.
For sure.
And his podcast is beautiful, and there's so much useful, like a beautiful interpretation, great analysis at the beginning of every episode, interest in the depths of a lot of the things. We're not doing that. What we are doing is saying to people, access the inaccessible, and you might be surprised.
Yeah.
So I mean, and so I don't think we're ever going to tap out. In fact, I'm going to delete it out of the
right now?
window right now. It's gone. There we go. So it's deleted out of our recording suite.
That's crazy. And you know what? I was like, if we tap out on the last 38 pages, what a shame that would be.
Yeah. Watch, it'll be Neil.
Like, I can't do this.
It'll be Neil. Sorry, Neil. I know you're listening. Neil would never tap out. We're excited. We only have 5 episodes left, and I'm slightly mourning. I'm slightly grieving this. It's a little bit sad. I'm looking forward to not having to try to like scramble for recording time, because that's a major stress in my life. Trying to nail TJ.
And you know how it is. The more that we get into the semester, the harder it is.
Absolutely, yeah. I totally get it. But we are only 5 episodes away. So what are you looking forward to in this last couple of weeks?
I'm looking forward for that wave. A lot of people describe the last book as the most beautiful and like awakening. Mm-hmm. I mean, they said that about
and Olivia,
but we'll see. But I think the thing that I'm also looking forward to is, while I do not want to jinx us or promise anything, you and I have talked about like what is next for us in the journey of this book.
Yeah.
And I think that is interesting. I can tell listeners that we will not be rereading it in the same way, but I think that the thing I'm looking forward to is that pin in the hat to say, hey, we did it. Yeah. And also, just continued collaboration with you and the ways that we're finding that to happen.
And I think I'm certainly not saying that, I would continue subscribing to this in your podcast app, because if something crazy happens next year, Wake related, they find a new manuscript or there's an article, then there's nothing to say that TJ and I won't jump on and do a special.
I've already promised an audio play of
Festy King,
which
that's
I'm
right.
like, now I gotta do research.
I might and I may well record an episode live from getting my Wake tattoo.
You and I should both send each other voice memos as it's happening and say, hey,
like that. But yeah, there's lots of, I mean, and then next year I'm going to Dublin, so I'm sure that there'll be a special Wake episode. Maybe I'll see if I can do something live from Sweeney's Pharmacy or with Sarah, or my wife is going to be furious if our entire trip is nothing but Finnegans Wake connected. So it won't
pick one day and just do that one day, and then you have to let it lie.
Yeah, no, we'll be doing a lot of theatre as well and all that kind of stuff, but. We're not going on Bloomsday. I know that. So, but so Wake will continue in some form or another. It'll sit in the podcast feed, and we might update it if necessary. But I think we'll probably have other projects because sometimes I love the reading episodes. I really do love the reading episodes. But my favorite episodes to record are these summary episodes, because TJ and I just sit and chat. We have no real plan. Like I have a list of resources I want to talk about, but we have no plan for what.
Don't let him lie to you. He has a 7-page doc here.
It's a 7-page doc, but I didn't read all of it. I'm just it's got all the documents, all the things that I lined up. So
I also love how you slowly removed the context at the beginning of the episode that there's no research.
Well, yeah, I can't help myself. I do. I am.
It's who you are.
Well, I'm a librarian. I mean, and so my entire, if anyone isn't aware, I was an academic who I retired from academia in 2022 and became a librarian. I'm a librarian at an academic library in Toronto. And so research is kind of in my blood, and it's basically all I know how to do. And so it feels inevitable that if I'm going to talk about something, for me, the greatest fear that I ever had as an educator was to be in front of a full lecture hall with no plan.
Oh gosh, I feel that.
You know that? Like getting up. Like I remember early on in my teaching career, I'd have bullet points, and then the last bullet point would be 20 minutes for discussion. And I'd say, is there any, questions? And there'd be nothing. And I'd go, I got to fill this time. I remember my favorite one was I had an incomplete lecture that I'd written where I got to a point in the lecture where I realized I hadn't completed writing the notes, and so I had nothing to discuss, so I had to make it up as I went. And I went back to my office and wrote angrily on the lecture notes, so that next time I came back, I'd remember to update them. But I didn't check those lecture notes before the next time. And the next time I wrote it, and I turned the page, and I laughed, and my student said, "What?" And I said, "Look, it's a note I wrote myself. It says, 'I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.'" Because I hadn't done the work. So, I think, and I used to teach theatre history, so it was all about like the details and the tiny little things. And so if you try to go in and you're trying to sort of tap dance by talking about, postmodernism, and you're trying to pull names and numbers out of your head, or you just,
and what the play did for it.
Particularly if the students aren't engaged or aren't talking back. So, so I prepare enough so that we never have a lull, and so and we never have. If anything, these episodes just get longer and longer.
It's okay, because you know what? It's more time with you.
Yes, absolutely. So looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to finishing. I'm looking forward to getting to the point where if you're at a department meeting or a drinks or something, and someone brings up Finnegans Wake and how it's impossible to read, you can say, "Oh, I've read that." That'll be.
What do you mean looking forward to it? Because it has already happened.
Tell me when.
All the time. People are like, what was it? Recently, I was telling someone about the podcast, and they're like, "You're reading that book?" I was like, "Yeah, we're almost done." And they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
And then they were like, "And you like Skin of Our Teeth?" And they're like, "Are you a modernist?" I was like, "I guess so." And then they started talking to me about modernism, and I was like, "I ain't that much of a modernist. Calm down."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is fantastic. And I mean, I always enjoy these summary episodes. We don't summarize much. I know we didn't talk much about Sean and Shem and all those guys. And,
let's be real with you. We don't know.
yeah, we don't have much insight in coming to these sort of things, but we certainly do like to celebrate the end of a chapter. We're not going to do a book 4 summary episode because book 4 is only 2 episodes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a summary episode of the entire book. Like a big one. That's going to be in a few weeks. But we also have a couple of bonus episodes coming up, some interesting guests coming up to give us a little bit more context. We keep teasing that this thing is going to finish on a certain date with a certain number of episodes, and I've decided just to stop worrying about that and say it's going to end when it ends with the episode numbers. That was for a while there, it looked like we were going to end on episode 50, and we were very happy about that. But then I got a couple of other guests who wanted to come in, so I'm like, 52. It's probably going to be 57 or 69 or
who knows,
204. Who knows? I don't know.
It will not be 204.
Well, but by then it'll be just be me.
I'll be looking at you from the outside, be like, I remember when.
So that is all the time we have this week for Wake. We'll return with our readings in a couple of weeks after a bonus episode. But when we return for our readings, we'll start on our final book, book 4, with some fan favourite guests, Lucy and Neil, coming in for the final stretch and the final couple of chapters. I've been Toby Malone, joined as ever by TJ Young. Thank you, TJ.
Of course, anytime.
Love having you here. It's the best. And we wave goodbye to the always entertaining book 3. And look ahead to the final steps. See you next week, summarisers and shortcut takers. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegans Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegans Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegans Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.